Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Cover 3 College Football Podcast. I'm Bud Elliot, and we are really pleased to be joined today by Joey Helmer of OU Insider, our Oklahoma 24/7 Sports Network site. This is our Around the Clock series. Obviously, Around the Clock, get it, play, and we're always on 24/7 Sports, so we're having our 24/7 Sports experts on. Joey, thanks for joining us here.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
No doubt, man. I'm excited about Oklahoma this year. You guys are really, really high in the polls, and it's got to be an exciting time to cover the Sooners.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of the thoughts around Norman right now are this may finally be the year. Is this going to be the year that they finally break through and win their 8th national championship? And I think a lot of people think right now that they're going to be a very complete team, and we haven't really seen a quote unquote complete team in Norman since 2008, really. And so there's a lot of people. Really having high expectations and high anticipation of this fall where things seem to be getting back to normal, maybe a full crowd for Oklahoma they're anticipating that. So all that kind of factoring in for Oklahoma.
All right, you ready to go on the clock?
Let's do it.
Putting 15 minutes on. Okay. Expectations for this team. What is sort of like the reasonable, obviously, but like reasonable baseline expectation that you have, maybe that reasonable fans have for this team this year?
Oklahoma needs to win a playoff game this year. I think that's the baseline. They have to break through. You look at the schedule, and Oklahoma should certainly win the Big 12 again this year. You're able to win that Red River game. You think there's not a ton of stumbling blocks for Oklahoma in 2021, and this has to be the year that they not only get back to the playoff, but finally win a game there, take a step, and potentially play for a national championship, if not win that one.
Just so the audience knows, non-conference games this year: Tulane, Western Carolina, Nebraska, and they get Iowa State, I believe, in Norman, right?
That is correct. Yes.
So that's that's a very winnable schedule, certainly for this group. Bring back quarterback Spencer Rattler. I know we were looking at some of the CBS mock drafts. He's really, he's there on top. Is the hype warranted for him to be, thought of this early in his career as a potential top 15, top 10 type draft pick?
Absolutely. You look at the intangibles, his skill set. A lot of people are comparing him right now to Patrick Mahomes in terms of his arm strength. And you look, and I certainly see it with how easy he flicks the ball 50, 60 downfield. The comparisons, we're comparing someone to Patrick Mahomes, so it's pretty lofty. But yeah, he's quite skilled, and this is a chance for him to kind of follow in the footsteps of Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray of being that top draft pick and a guy that can win a Heisman Trophy. And all those expectations are warranted. Coming out of the spring, what's funny is people watch the spring game and are saying, is there a quarterback competition in Norman here with Caleb Williams? And no, there's not a quarterback competition. Spencer Rattler is the guy, and next year it's going to be Caleb Williams' show. But yeah, it's Spencer Rattler's time to shine with this offense again, and potentially be the guy that could finally win Oklahoma an 8th national championship.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that. Our Tom Fernelli on Cover 3 watched the spring game. Was like, are we sure that Caleb Williams isn't the better quarterback here? And I said, Todd, I'm not sure, but like I think it's probably Rattler. I'm going to ask Joey just to confirm. I'm glad you brought that up. We've compared Oklahoma in some ways to a team that almost like a pro team that went all in on free agency to try to go for that title. They see the window, they want to push for it. And the free agency in college football is obviously the transfer portal. Oklahoma very active in the transfer portal this offseason. Who, in your opinion, right now, of the guys they took are due to they're counting on to be starters or like really key role players?
Well, Eric Gray is one for sure. You look, and that was a big takeaway from the spring game was how good he looked. He scored a touchdown, and I was so impressed with him putting his foot in the ground and on a dime, making a defender miss and, basically walking into the end zone from there. So he's going to be a big factor in the Sooners running back game, along with Kennedy Brooks and the other two Tennessee guys that they brought in, Wanye Morris, and then, of course, Key Lawrence are both going to be key players as well. Oklahoma, like you said, has done a tremendous job with this transfer portal and kind of, bolstering its roster to one that can potentially compete for a national championship. And so, I look in those three guys will all have key roles, but Eric Gray is a guy that is going to factor into Oklahoma's offense heavily.
We talk about Ohio State's receiver room a lot, and like for good reason. They just had a backup transfer, and Bama jumped all over him and Jameson Williams, and they wanted him. But am I wrong in thinking Oklahoma's receiver group has got as good an argument as anybody to kind of be number 2 in the country, behind maybe just slightly behind Ohio State there? Like Joey, I see all these names I remember as recruits, and they got just stud after stud on this roster. They got to be feeling pretty good about the receiver group this year, right?
Yeah, definitely. You look and Marvin Mims comes back after scoring more touchdowns than any freshman in Oklahoma Sooners history. You look at the guys like CeeDee Lamb, obviously Mark Andrews at that inside receiver position recently, and none of those guys have scored more touchdowns than Marvin Mims' 9 last year. And then you look Jaden Hazelwood. I think a lot of people are expecting him to finally break out and be that big time receiver. Austin Stogner's healthy again at that inside spot. So yeah, Oklahoma is loaded at the receiver position. There's no doubt about it. And that is, in my mind, even as we go with talking about the Trajan Bridges situation, I still feel very good about Oklahoma at the pass catching position.
And just for the audience out there, obviously being a national pod, we're gonna have some folks who are not Oklahoma fans listening to this. What is the Trajan Bridges situation as of about midday on May 11th?
Yeah, so Bridges and Seth McGowan, neither are with the team. There have been charges filed, felony charges against those two guys for an alleged incident in Norman recently. And so Oklahoma certainly tried to get ahead of that situation, but Trajan Bridges was a guy that was going to potentially be a big-time pass catcher for Oklahoma this season. And as we mentioned, some of those other players, I think it takes away a guy that could really stretch the field, but at the same time, you feel good about that unit.
For sure. Well, one thing that was uncharacteristic of a Lincoln Riley offense that cropped up last year, well, I guess two things. Number one, they slowed down a little bit. They didn't run with quite the same pace, but they also, under Bill Biedenbaugh, if I'm saying that right, I've seen all the recruits say his name a million times. They were 110th in havoc rate allowed nationally, which was surprising. Like the offensive line had some more hiccups at times than it normally did, and maybe part of that's a freshman quarterback calling the protections and still learning how to do the checks. What are your expectations for this offensive line this year?
Well, it's all predicated on really what happens at that center position. I think going into the spring, I thought maybe it would be Chris Murray. Coming out of the spring, Andrew Rain maybe looks like the guy that's going to take over for Creed Humphrey, a player that I think if people didn't realize how critical he was to Oklahoma offensively, they certainly do now, drafted by the Chiefs, and a player that really orchestrated everything for Oklahoma offensively. And so, to me, it starts there. Are they going to be able to get the same production at the center position? And Oklahoma, yeah, I think as you kind of alluded to, was a little bit disappointing on the offensive line last year. They weren't pleased with especially their play early in the season. They came together as the year went on, but they're looking to kind of hit it from game one this year and come together as a group and be more similar to that a 2017 group that was the Joe Moore Award winning unit with the likes of Orlando Brown and company. And look, Oklahoma with Bill Biedenbaugh has been stout up front, and that's the expectations. And I think maybe if you want to say a biggest question mark for Oklahoma offensively, that's exactly what it is. How is this offensive line going to come together?
That's interesting. That's actually where I was going to go with you there. So Oklahoma, the expectation is that they get back to the playoff, win a playoff game. If they fall short of that, is it that offensive line? Is that, in your mind, likely the catalyst, or is it something on the other side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, it probably you could be looking at the offensive line there. I feel really good about it's interesting. You feel good about the defense coming into the season. Jalen Redmond's back. Perrion Winfrey's going to be a potential a very high draft pick. You got an edge rusher and Nick Bonito that is a top 10 projected by multiple sites right now in the 22 draft. And so you look there, you feel good about the linebacker core and the depth in the secondary. There's questions defensively as to right now who's even going to start. I think Delarian Turner-Yell at safety is kind of the only guy that's penciled in. Pat Fields, another safety, missed the entirety of spring, but his job is not entirely nailed down. Then you look at that corner position as well. But yeah, I think really, if you had to put it on one position, it might be that offensive line. There's enough pieces, new pieces there. Adrian Ely's another guy you're having to replace. Some were quite surprised that he left for the NFL draft. Eventually, this recently wasn't drafted. And so there are players, there are voids to fill there that on the offensive line that have to be addressed.
For sure. Sticking with the defensive backfield there, you notice there's a number of questions. Are those more because Oklahoma has a lot of options now that they could plug in, or is it questions of people aren't proven? Like how much of it is a concern, and how much of it in your mind is just, well, we think they'll be pretty good. We just need to figure out who actually starts.
Yeah, I think it's the depth is starting to become a difference maker for Oklahoma and Alex Grinch and Roy Manning in that secondary. Jaden Davis is a guy that played in 10 games last year, a really talented corner. I talked about Pat Fields. This is a veteran guy. But then you look and you bring in Key Lawrence that can be an impact player defensively. There's a number of players. I think it's more a depth thing than anything else. Oklahoma, its biggest issue on that side of the ball has not necessarily been the top 11 that they play. It's been the guys behind them, those 11. Are they able to fill out a two deep? You look at Alabama or Clemson or some of these other teams that have been sick elite defensively, and it's not just the starters that they have, it's the players that can come in behind them and play at an elite level still. And that's the difference, I think, for Oklahoma right now that they're addressing on the recruiting ranks, is that they're starting to get some of those players, specifically in the secondary.
I thought the biggest difference between 2019 and 2020 defensively for OU was I don't know how I say this. In 2019, I thought they made some defensive improvements, but a lot of that was just turnovers, right? And turnovers have a decent luck component. Like there's some skill in it, but there's also a luck component. Last year, it felt like they were actually playing good defense more consistently. They weren't totally reliant on, it wasn't turnovers or touchdowns, right? It was, they actually got more stops. Can they take another leap this year?
Yeah, I think definitely. And Grinch's one gap scheme, I think, has helped significantly. Up front, these players are getting in the backfield and being able to kind of freely make plays, as opposed to, holding up and allowing the linebackers to go make plays. It's a very aggressive, attack-oriented defense that Grinch has instilled here at Oklahoma. And I think he's now, as we've talked about, getting his players, his type of players that love that system and attack. And those things translate to turnovers. When you play with an aggressive attacking mentality, it translates into turnovers. It translates into taking the ball away. And there is a step to be made there still for Oklahoma to come up with more turnovers, to come up with those game-changing plays that we talk about that give the ball back to Oklahoma's offense to score points. And so, there is absolutely a next step. While Oklahoma ranked in the top 25 in a number of categories, they were fantastic in third down defense last year. That was one specific category that stood out. There are strides to be made for sure. And that was kind of the focus, is taking that next step this spring.
All right, we've had some interesting talk here, talking about maybe some of the pain points, some of the spots where there's a little bit less sure about. Let's have some fun. If Oklahoma exceeds their expectation, if the expectation is winning a playoff game, Well, then that means that they're winning 2 playoff games, which means they're the national champs. Joey Helmer, who in your mind is a guy who is able to play to his absolute ceiling or two? Obviously, they might probably need a couple guys to, really exceed expectations if they're to win that step and actually bring home, a national title to Oklahoma.
Well, I don't think it'll be a super surprise to anyone, but first and foremost is Spencer Rattler. He has to live up to those Heisman expectations that people are kind of throwing on him. And there's plenty of reason to believe that he will do that. I think he was phenomenal at times last year. Really, after he was benched during the Texas game and kind of reset and came back and brought Oklahoma back to win that, it brought them strong to win that game against Texas. The remainder of the season, he was great. On the defensive side of the ball, it's a couple of guys I've already mentioned. I think Nick Bonito has to be a potential All-American type player, and Perrion Winfrey and Jalen Redmond could be an impact player on the interior defensive line. If Oklahoma is really nasty on that side of the ball and they're what a lot of people expect them to be offensively, then there's no reason to believe that they can't win a playoff game. And I think something else that needs to be stated is one of the biggest advantages that Oklahoma has versus some of these other contenders, if you will, is that Spencer Rattler is what we consider a veteran quarterback. That's a tremendous asset in today's day and age of college football, where so much of it is predicated on offense and who can score so many points. You have to feel good that you have an experienced signal caller as a contender coming into the season.
It makes a lot of sense to me. Joey, we had to go into overtime a little bit, but not too bad. I'm sure you heard in the background there the timer going off. Also, my wife coming home, so that's work from home, right? Really appreciate you coming on the Cover 3 podcast for us. It should be an awesome season to follow Oklahoma. You guys can visit OU Insider, follow Joey on Twitter as well. Joey, hit him with your Twitter handle, if you will.
Sure, it's at Joey Helmer 247. Pretty simple. At Joey Helmer 247.
There you go. All right, this has been the Around the Clock series featuring our 24/7 sports experts on the Cover 3 College Ball podcast. Really appreciate you all listening. Subscribe on whatever podcast app you prefer, also on YouTube. Thanks, y'all.